What happens when you're a successful black woman elegantly seated in business class and the flight crew decides you don't belong? They ignore your requests, deny you service, and try to humiliate you in front of a cabin full of strangers, all while wearing polite plastic smiles. They assumed she was just another passenger they could bully into silence. They didn't know they were making the biggest mistake of their careers, because this woman wasn't just a passenger, and she was about to call for a vote that would seal their fate before the plane ever touched the ground. The scent of premium leather and subtle expensive perfume filled the business class cabin of Ascend Air Flight 815 from New York to London. It was an environment meticulously crafted to soothe the egos and bodies of the world's elite. Each passenger was ensconced in their own private pod, a cocoon of luxury with lie-flat beds, noise-canceling headphones, and screens larger than most people's laptops. For Dr. Naomi Reed, it was simply a conducive space to work. At 46, Naomi carried an aura of quiet authority that was often mistaken for aloofness. Her hair was styled in immaculate locks, framing a face with high cheekbones and intelligent, observant eyes that missed nothing. Dressed in a tailored navy blue blazer and comfortable but chic trousers, she looked every bit the part of the successful academic and economist she was. What she didn't look like, at least to some, was the newly and quietly appointed chairwoman of the board for a multi-billion-dollar global acquisitions firm, the very firm that had just 3 weeks prior completed its purchase of Ascend Air. This flight was for all intents and purposes her first inspection of her newest, most customer-facing asset. She settled into her seat, 4D an aisle seat in the center row. She nodded politely to the man in 4G, who was already engrossed in a financial newspaper. Naomi preferred to be unassuming. Power, she had learned long ago, was most effective when it was silent until it needed to be heard. The flight attendants began their pre-departure ballet. They moved with a practiced grace, their uniforms a crisp, stylish gray. The lead flight attendant, a woman in her late 40s with blonde hair pulled into a severe chignon, approached the passenger across the aisle. "Mr. Henderson, welcome back. A pleasure to have you with us again," she said, her voice a smooth, practiced melody. "May I get you started with a glass of our Duvel Leroy Brut, or perhaps something else, Lorraine? Good to see you," the man boomed. "The champagne would be lovely." Lorraine. Naomi filed the name away. Lorraine's smile was wide and bright, a perfect advertisement for the airline. She moved to the next passenger, and the next offering personalized greetings and pre-departure drinks. When she reached the row in front of Naomi, she was equally effusive. But when her eyes swept over Naomi, there was a flicker, a momentary pause in the rhythm of her hospitality. The brilliant smile tightened by a millimeter. "Can I get you something?" Lorraine's voice was different now. The melody was gone, replaced by a flat, perfunctory tone. The offer of champagne by name was replaced by a generic, almost challenging question. "I would love a glass of the Duval Leroy, thank you," Naomi replied, her own voice even and pleasant. Lorraine's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'll have to see if we have any left, chilled. We've been quite busy this morning." She said it as if the full cabin were a surprise, a sudden inconvenience. Without waiting for a response, she turned and continued down the aisle, her warmth returning instantly for the passenger behind Naomi. Naomi watched her go, a familiar, weary feeling settling in her stomach. It was a sensation she'd felt 1,000 times before. The subtle, almost deniable dismissiveness. The questioning of her place in a space she had more than earned the right to occupy. She could have challenged it, of course. She could have pointed out that the service had just begun, that it was absurd to suggest they might be out of their signature champagne. But that wasn't her way. Her way was to observe, to collect data, to allow a pattern to emerge that was so clear, so undeniable, that it would collapse under the weight of its own ugliness. A younger male flight attendant, whose name tag read Leo, soon appeared with a tray of drinks. He moved with a nervous energy, eager to please. He served the man across the aisle, then the woman in front, his movements swift and sure. He approached Naomi's row, gave a glass of champagne to the man in 4G. And then, with a brief, almost fearful glance at Naomi, he turned and walked away, completely bypassing her. It was so blatant, so deliberate, that it was almost comical. The man in 4G, Mr. David Chen, who happened to be one of her most trusted board members, caught her eye. He raised a subtle eyebrow. David, a sharp and perceptive man in his early 50s, knew exactly who she was and the purpose of this trip. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a look of shared disbelief in his eyes. Naomi offered him a small, calm smile, in return, a silent communication passing between them. Let's see how this plays out. She didn't press the call button. She waited. 10 minutes passed. The cabin door was closed, the safety demonstration began, and still her space on the console remained empty. Lorraine and Leo bustled past her several times, their eyes studiously avoiding her, as if she were a ghost in the machine. Naomi opened her laptop and began to review a quarterly report from another of the firm's recent acquisitions, her face a mask of serene concentration. But beneath the surface, a cold resolve was beginning to form. This wasn't just about a glass of champagne anymore. This was about the core of the brand she had just acquired. A brand that promised luxury and respect, but it seemed only to a select few. As the plane ascended into the vast blue emptiness above the clouds, Naomi felt a profound sense of disappointment. She had hoped for the best from Ascend Air. She had read their mission statements, their glowing press releases about world-class service, but a company's true culture wasn't in its press releases. It was in the 1,000 tiny interactions between its employees and its customers. And in the first 30 minutes of her flight, her new company was failing spectacularly. And the two people at the center of that failure had no idea that their final judgment wouldn't be coming from a customer complaint form, but from the very woman they had deemed unworthy of a simple glass of champagne. The seatbelt sign pinged off, signaling the aircraft had reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. A sense of calm settled over the business class cabin as passengers adjusted their seats, opened books, or donned their headphones. For Naomi, the calm was purely external. Internally, she was documenting every slight, every moment of deliberate disregard. This was no longer a personal insult. It was a case study in systemic failure. Lorraine Bishop, the lead flight attendant, glided down the aisle, her movements a performance of effortless grace. She held a leather-bound menu. She stopped at each pod, crouching slightly to be at eye level with the passengers, a gesture of deference and respect. "Mr. Henderson," she murmured to the man across the aisle. "I just wanted to confirm your pre-selected choice of the pan-seared halibut. An excellent decision. And can I recommend the Sancerre to pair with it? It's a truly sublime combination." Her voice was an intimate conspirator's whisper. She continued this ritual with each passenger, her tone varying from warmly professional to charmingly familiar. When she arrived at Naomi's row, she addressed David Chen in 4G with the same warmth. "Mr. Chen, your pre-order of the beef fillet is confirmed. Would you care for the Bordeaux with that this evening?" Then she turned to Naomi. The crouch disappeared. She stood tall, looking down. The leather-bound menu remained clutched in her hand, unopened. "We'll be starting the meal service shortly," she stated. It wasn't a question or an invitation for discussion. It was a flat announcement, devoid of any of the pleasantries she had afforded every other passenger. "Thank you," Naomi replied, her voice neutral. "I pre-ordered the roasted vegetable tart." Lorraine's eyes narrowed fractionally. "I'll have to check on that. The catering manifests can sometimes be inaccurate." The implication was clear. The error, if there was one, was likely Naomi's. Without another word, she moved on. David Chen leaned slightly across the aisle. "Are you seeing this?" He whispered, his voice tight with disbelief. "I'm not just seeing it, David," Naomi murmured back, her eyes fixed on her laptop screen. "I'm experiencing it and documenting it." The third flight attendant, a young woman named Chloe, began the hot towel service. She was brunette with kind, anxious eyes, and she moved with a tentativeness that stood in stark contrast to Lorraine's imperious glide and Leo's sycophantic scurrying. When she reached Naomi, she offered the hot towel with a small, genuine smile. "Here you go, ma'am," she said softly. "Thank you, Chloe," Naomi replied, making a point to use her name. The young woman's eyes widened slightly in surprise, and she offered another small, nervous smile before moving on. Here was an anomaly in the data, a variable that suggested not everyone was part of the problem. The main event, the meal service, began. The clinking of fine china and silverware filled the cabin. The aromas of seared fish, roasted beef, and delicate sauces wafted through the air. Leo and Lorraine worked in perfect exclusionary sync. They laid out crisp white linens on the tray tables of the passengers around Naomi. They poured wine, offered bread from a basket filled with artisanal selections. Naomi watched as the man in front of her was served his appetizer. She watched as David beside her received his. Her own tray table remained bare. She was an island of neglect in an ocean of solicitous service. It was a humiliation by 1,000 cuts performed with a veneer of professional deniability. If she were to complain, they could simply say, "We were just coming to you, ma'am." But they weren't. The delay was calculated, designed to make her feel invisible, to put her in her place. Finally, after every other passenger in her section had their appetizer and wine, Leo approached her pod. He avoided eye contact, his focus entirely on the task he was about to perform. "Sorry for the delay," he mumbled the apology, utterly insincere. He placed a linen on her table, but it was done with a certain carelessness, not quite centered, a small but meaningful act of disrespect. "I believe there was a problem with your meal choice," he said, reciting a line he had clearly been fed by Lorraine. "The roasted vegetable tart you selected wasn't loaded for this flight." Naomi maintained her composure. "That's odd," she said calmly. "I received an email confirmation just yesterday. Would you like to see it?" Leo's face flushed. This was not part of the script. He was clearly unprepared for a passenger who had evidence. No, that won't be necessary. It's a catering mistake. We can offer you the standard economy class chicken or pasta. That's all we have left." The offer was the ultimate insult. To be in a business class seat for which her company had paid nearly $10,000, and to be offered the leftover economy meal. It was designed to be the final crushing humiliation. David Chen, unable to contain himself any longer, spoke up. "That's outrageous. There must be other options." "What about the other business class meals?" Lorraine materialized at Leo's side, a protective, almost predatory look on her face. "I'm afraid not, sir," she said, addressing David, but looking at Naomi. "All our business class meals are specifically allocated based on the pre-orders we received. Since her pre-order is missing from our manifest, we have nothing else to offer from this cabin. Her smile was a tight, triumphant slash. It's a most unfortunate error on the part of the catering company. Every word was a lie, and they both knew it. There were always extra meals loaded for exactly this kind of situation. So, to be clear, Naomi said, her voice now carrying a new edge, not of anger, but of chilling precision. I am a ticketed confirmed passenger in business class. You are telling me that the only sustenance you can offer me for this 7-hour flight is a leftover meal from the economy cabin. I'm afraid so, Lorraine said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. Unless you'd prefer just the bread roll. The passengers nearby were now openly staring. An older woman in seat 3G, who had been introduced as Ms. Isabella Rossi, another of Naomi's board members, looked on with a deeply furrowed brow. The performance was having its intended effect of isolating Naomi, but it was also having an unintended one. It was creating witnesses. Naomi looked from Lorraine's smug face to Leo's nervous one. She saw Chloe hovering in the background near the galley, wringing her hands and looking utterly distraught. This was the moment. The data collection was complete. The pattern was undeniable. The case was ready to be made. She took a slow, deliberate breath. I see, she said. In that case, I will decline the economy meal. And the bread roll. She folded her hands on her bare, lineless tray table. However, she continued, her voice now clear and carrying through the quiet cabin. I believe we have a more pressing issue to attend to than my dinner. She turned her gaze to David Chen. Then she looked across the aisle to Isabella Rossi. David. Isabella, she said, her voice now imbued with the unmistakable ring of command. Given the substandard level of service and the clear operational and ethical crisis we are currently witnessing, I believe it is incumbent upon us to convene an emergency board meeting. A collective gasp went through the nearby seats. Lorraine's smirk faltered, replaced by a look of utter confusion. I'm sorry, she stammered. A what? Naomi held her gaze. You heard me. An emergency meeting of the board of directors of the parent company of Ascend Air. Right here. Right now. The air in the business class cabin, once thick with the scent of roasted halibut and entitlement, was now crackling with a different kind of energy. It was the electric hum of a power dynamic shifting so violently and so suddenly that it left a vacuum in its wake. Lorraine Bishop stared at Naomi, her mind struggling to process the words she'd just heard. Board meeting? She repeated, a nervous, incredulous laugh escaping her lips. Ma'am, with all due respect, you're just a passenger. You can't just call a board meeting. Can't I? Naomi's voice was dangerously quiet. She turned her full attention to the lead flight attendant, and for the first time, Lorraine saw past the calm demeanor and caught a glimpse of the steel beneath. My name is Dr. Naomi Reed, and 3 weeks ago my firm North Star Acquisitions finalized its purchase of this airline. As of last Monday, I was appointed chairwoman of the board. So to answer your question, yes, I can. The color drained from Lorraine's face. She looked as though she had been physically struck. Her eyes darted frantically between Naomi the placid and now deeply interested David Chen and the stern-faced Isabella Rossi. She saw no joke in their expressions, only a terrifying, unified seriousness. Leo, standing just behind Lorraine, went completely pale. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trap door and was hearing the distinct sound of the lever being pulled. David Chen placed his napkin on his tray table. Naomi is correct, he said, his voice calm but firm for the benefit of those listening. I am David Chen, and this is Isabella Rossi, We are both executive members of the board, and our chairwoman is right. A meeting is in order. Isabella Rossi, a formidable woman in her 60s with a reputation for being a shark in any negotiation, unbuckled her seatbelt. Completely in order, she affirmed, her sharp eyes boring into Lorraine. In fact, I'd say it's mission critical. The fiction that Lorraine and Leo had so carefully constructed that Naomi was an interloper, a person of no consequence, had just been shredded and set ablaze before their eyes. The authority they had wielded with such petty cruelty was revealed to be a pathetic mirage. The true power in the cabin had been sitting quietly in seat 4D all along. Now Naomi continued her tone all business. Given the circumstances, we can dispense with the usual formalities. The motion on the floor pertains to a clear and present danger to the brand integrity and fiduciary health of Ascend Air. She looked directly at Lorraine and Leo, who were frozen in the aisle like statues in a museum of spectacular failure. The danger I am referring to, Naomi clarified for the silent watching cabin, is the discriminatory, unprofessional, and hostile behavior exhibited by members of this flight crew. Specifically, lead flight attendant Lorraine Bishop and flight attendant Leo Vance. Lorraine's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The practiced smoothness, the veneer of control, had shattered, revealing a raw, panicked terror. For the record, Naomi went on her memory as sharp as a recording device. Let the minutes show that from the moment I boarded, I was treated with a dismissiveness not afforded to other passengers. I was denied the standard pre-departure beverage service. My presence was ignored by both Ms. Bishop and Mr. Vance. And most egregiously, I was refused the meal I had pre-ordered and was then offered in a deliberately humiliating fashion a leftover meal from another class of service. She paused, letting the indictment hang in the air. This was not a simple mistake. It was a pattern of targeted disrespect, predicated on an assumption about my race and my status. It is the kind of cancer that can destroy a service-based company from the inside out. It is everything our new ownership has pledged to eradicate. She turned to David and Isabella. I am therefore putting forth a motion for the immediate termination of the employment contracts of Lorraine Bishop and Leo Vance, effective immediately on the grounds of gross misconduct, willful discrimination, and actions causing significant reputational damage to this company. The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the faint hum of the Rolls-Royce engines carrying them across the Atlantic. Lorraine finally found her voice, though it was a choked, desperate rasp. You can't do this. We're in the middle of a flight. You have no right. On the contrary, Ms. Bishop, Isabella. Rossi cut in her voice like ice. We have every right. Your employment contract contains a clause regarding termination for cause, which includes bringing the airline into disrepute. I'd say you've managed to do that quite thoroughly in the last 2 hours. You are lucky we are a civilized board. Some might be inclined to sue you for damages. Leo began to babble his words, tumbling out in a panicked stream. It was her. It was Lorraine's idea. I was just following her lead. I didn't want to. I swear I can get you the vegetable tart. I think there's one. I hid one, just in case. His pathetic confession hung in the air, a final damning piece of evidence. He had known all along that the meal was there. Naomi held up a hand, silencing him. Her expression was not one of anger, but of profound disappointment. Your cowardice, Mr. Vance, is as damaging as her prejudice. You had a choice and you chose to be complicit. That makes you equally responsible. She then looked past the disgraced pair toward the galley. Chloe, she called out, her voice also softening slightly. The young flight attendant Chloe Sharma emerged, her face pale, and her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else, validation. She had seen it all, and her distress was now contextualized. "Chloe," Naomi said, "could you please use the in-flight phone to contact the flight deck? Inform Captain Michelson that the board has made an executive decision regarding a staffing issue and that we will require him to implement our directive." Yes, ma'am," Chloe stammered, rushing to comply. Naomi then turned back to her two fellow board members. "The motion is on the floor. All in favor of the immediate termination of Ms. Bishop and Mr. Vance I." David Chen said instantly, his voice resonating with conviction. I, Isabella Rossi, said, her tone a final, unappealable judgment. Naomi nodded. "The motion carries unanimously," she declared. "Ms. Bishop, Mr. Vance, as of this moment, you are no longer employees of Ascend Air. Your authority on this aircraft is revoked. You will be confined to the galley for the remainder of this flight. You will not interact with any passengers. Upon landing at Heathrow, you will be met by airline security and head of UK operations. Is that understood?" Lorraine Bishop finally broke. Her face crumpled, the carefully constructed mask of superiority dissolving into a mess of pure, unadulterated despair. The reality of what she had done, of who she had done it to, crashed down upon her with the force of a tidal wave. She had tried to humiliate a passenger who held her entire career in the palm of her hand, and she had succeeded only in orchestrating her own spectacular high-altitude downfall. The verdict delivered. The atmosphere in the business-class cabin was surreal. The passengers who had witnessed the drama sat in stunned silence. They had paid for a luxury flight. They had received a front-row seat to a corporate execution. Lorraine Bishop, her face a mask of disbelief and horror, seemed to sway on her feet. All the air of authority, the condescending poise had evaporated, leaving behind a brittle, terrified woman. This isn't possible," she whispered more to herself than anyone else. Leo Vance, on the other hand, immediately devolved into frantic pleading. "Please, Dr. Reed," he begged, his eyes wide and wet with tears. "Please, I have a family. I'll do anything. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I can apologize." "Your opportunity to apologize, Mr. Vance, would have been when you first chose to follow a discriminatory order," Naomi stated, her voice devoid of sympathy. "Your opportunity to show integrity would have been to serve me the water I initially didn't ask for, or the meal you knew was available. You failed on all counts. Integrity is not something you demonstrate only when you're caught." Just then, Chloe returned from the galley, the handset of the in-flight phone still trembling slightly in her hand. "Captain Michelson is on the line for you, Dr. Reed," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Naomi took the phone. "Captain Michelson, this is Naomi Reed." The voice on the other end was professional, tinged with understandable confusion. "Dr. Reed, I was not aware you were on board. Welcome. My flight attendant mentioned an unusual situation." "That's one word for it," Captain Naomi replied calmly. "To be direct, we have had a severe service and conduct failure in the business class cabin. As chairwoman of the board, I convened an emergency vote with 2 other board members present on this flight. We have voted for the immediate termination of employment for lead flight attendant Lorraine Bishop and flight attendant Leo Vance. They are to be relieved of all duties for the remainder of the flight." There was a moment of stunned silence from the cockpit. "Relieved of duty mid-flight, ma'am, that is. Highly irregular." "So is the behavior that precipitated this decision," Naomi said firmly. "Let me be clear, Captain. This is not a request. It is a directive from the ownership of this airline. Your purser from the first-class cabin is to come back to business class, and with Ms. Chloe Sharma's assistance will manage the cabin for the rest of the journey to London. Ms. Bishop and Mr. Vance are to be confined to the rear galley and are to have no further contact with passengers. They are a liability I am not willing to tolerate for another 5 hours. Upon landing, they will be met by security. Do you understand the captain? A man used to being the ultimate authority on his aircraft was clearly grappling with the situation. But the chain of command in this instance went far beyond the cockpit door. Yes, Dr. Reed, I understand. Directive received. Thank you, Captain, Naomi said, and handed the phone back to Chloe. The reality of the situation finally landed on Lorraine. She wasn't just being reprimanded. She was being stripped of her position in real time in front of the very passengers she had sought to impress with her petty power. Her entire identity on this aircraft was being publicly dismantled. A portly, distinguished-looking man with silver hair, the first-class purser, an industry veteran named Arthur, soon appeared from the front cabin. He had a bewildered but professional look on his face. Chloe quickly and quietly explained the situation. Arthur's eyes widened, and he shot a look of profound disappointment at Lorraine, a colleague he had likely known for years. Lorraine. Leo Arthur said, his voice low but firm, leaving no room for argument. You heard the directive. To the rear galley. Now! Leo, sobbing, openly turned and practically fled down the aisle. But Lorraine didn't move. She stood rooted to the spot, her gaze locked on Naomi. A new emotion was replacing the terror, a dark, venomous rage. You! She spat, her voice low and trembling with fury. You did this! You set us up! Naomi looked up from her laptop, her expression unreadable. I did nothing but board a flight and sit in the seat my company paid for. You wrote this entire scene yourself, Ms. Bishop. Every word, every action. All I did was pull back the curtain. The venom in Lorraine's eyes intensified. For a terrifying second, it looked as though she might lunge at Naomi. The purser, Arthur, stepped between them, a solid, immovable presence. That's enough, Lorraine, he said sternly. Go. Don't make this any worse than you already have. Defeated Lorraine finally turned. As she walked past Naomi's seat, she gave her a look of pure hatred, a look that promised this wasn't over. It was a look Naomi absorbed without flinching. Then the former lead flight attendant, stripped of her wings at 35,000 feet, completed her walk of shame down the aisle and disappeared behind the galley curtain, a ghost of her former self. A strange new order settled over the cabin. Chloe, though visibly nervous, stepped into her new role with a quiet competence. Assisted by the veteran purser, she began to clear away the half-eaten meals, her movements gentle and respectful. She approached Naomi's pod, her face a mixture of apology and awe. Dr. Reed, she began, her voice trembling slightly. I am so sorry for what happened. It was wrong. I should have said something. You were in a difficult position, Chloe, Naomi said, her tone softening for the first time. But what you do now is what matters. Just take care of the passengers. Yes, ma'am, Chloe said with newfound resolve. She then hesitated. Dr. Reed, your roasted vegetable tart. It's in the warmer. May I get it for you? Naomi considered it for a moment. Then she gave a small smile. Yes, Chloe. Thank you. I would like that very much. As Chloe went to retrieve the meal, David Chen leaned over. Well, I don't think the in-flight entertainment can top that, he said, dryly. He then grew more serious. You handled that perfectly, Naomi. You let them build their own gallows. It was never my intention to do this so publicly, Naomi confessed in a low voice. But they forced my hand. This wasn't just a rude flight attendant. This was a symptom of a diseased culture. It had to be excised immediately and decisively. When Chloe returned with the meal, it was perfectly plated. The roasted vegetable tart was golden brown, and the accompanying salad was crisp and fresh. She placed it before Naomi with a reverence that bordered on ceremonial. As Naomi took her first bite, a quiet satisfaction settled over her. It wasn't about the food. It was about the restoration of order. It was about the quiet, undeniable truth that respect wasn't a privilege to be doled out by the prejudiced, but a right to be commanded by the dignified. The rest of the flight to London was the quietest, most efficient flight any of them had ever been on. The descent into London was a slow, majestic fall from grace. As the Rolls-Royce engines throttled back from their steady transatlantic hum to a deeper, more resonant groan, the aircraft began its gentle arc towards the earth. Below, the patchwork quilt of southern England resolved itself from abstract geometry into fields and villages under a characteristically overcast sky. For most passengers in the hushed business-class cabin, this was a familiar and welcome transition, the beginning of the end of a long journey. But for those aware of the drama that had transpired, it felt like the final, inexorable approach of a judge's gavel. Naomi Reed watched the landscape slide by her face, impassive, her hands resting calmly on her laptop. Inside, however, her mind was a whirlwind of calculated thought. There was no sense of triumph, no thrill of victory. Instead, she felt a profound, weary sense of responsibility. The public spectacle had been an unfortunate necessity, a piece of corporate theater she was forced to direct. Now came the unglamorous, essential work, ensuring the disease she had just exposed was not merely isolated, but completely eradicated. This incident was a gift, in a way. A raw, ugly, undeniable data point that she could leverage to force the deep systemic change that mission statements and corporate retreats could never achieve. She was already mentally drafting the memo to the entire Ascend Air leadership team outlining the new non-negotiable standards of service dignity and accountability. In the rear galley, the world had shrunk to the size of a closet. Lorraine Bishop sat on a jump seat, her body rigid with a furious, impotent energy. For the past 5 hours, she had cycled through a nauseating vortex of emotions, disbelief, bargaining terror, and now a deep, simmering rage that had settled like poison in her gut. The quiet efficiency of the cabin service continuing without her was the deepest insult. The polite tones of Chloe and Arthur, the gentle clinking of cutlery, the occasional murmur of a content passenger, each sound was a fresh torment, a confirmation of her sudden irrelevance. She blamed Naomi. Entirely. In her mind, the black woman in 4D was a predator who had boarded the plane with the sole intention of destroying her. She had laid a trap, feigning offense, luring Lorraine into a web from which there was no escape. This narrative, as illogical as it was the only thing protecting her ego from the crushing reality of her own monumental stupidity. Leo Vance sat opposite her, a crumpled, sobbing mess. His fear was more primal and less complex. He saw his career, his mortgage, his future, all dissolving into nothingness. Every so often he would mutter, "We should have just given her the tart," a pathetic mantra that only served to stoke the fires of Lorraine's fury. The gentle bump of the tires on the Heathrow tarmac sent a jolt through the cabin. As the plane taxied towards the terminal, a new and final tension set in. The performance was over. The consequences were about to be delivered. The aircraft docked at the gate with a soft thud, and the engine spooled down into silence. The seatbelt sign pinged off. But before anyone could move, the calm, authoritative voice of Arthur, the first-class purser, came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, a brief announcement. On behalf of Captain Michelson, we kindly request that you remain in your seats for just a few moments. We need to allow some specific personnel to board the aircraft to handle an internal matter before general deplaning can commence. We appreciate your patience and understanding. A wave of murmurs rippled through the cabin. Everyone knew what this meant. This was not a standard procedure. This was the arrival of the executioners. All eyes, a mixture of curiosity, pity, and morbid fascination, turned towards the front of the plane. Naomi remained perfectly still, a silent observer of the process she had set in motion. David Chen caught her eye and gave a slow, deliberate nod. Isabella Rossi had her arms crossed, her expression one of grim satisfaction. The cabin door opened with a pneumatic hiss. 3 figures stepped aboard their presence, immediately shifting the atmosphere. The first was a woman in her 50s, dressed in a sharp, dark gray Ascend Air corporate suit. This was Maria Kendrick, the head of UK operations, her face a mask of controlled, professional anger. She was flanked by 2 large men in impeccably tailored but nondescript dark suits. They were not smiling. Their eyes scanned the cabin with a detached, clinical efficiency. They were corporate security specialists in handling high-level sensitive dismissals. Maria exchanged a few hushed words with Arthur, who gave a discreet, almost sorrowful nod towards the rear galley. Then the trio began their long walk down the aisle. Their footsteps seemed unnaturally loud in the silent cabin. They moved with a chilling sense of purpose, their gazes fixed straight ahead, ignoring the staring passengers. It was a walk of shame by proxy, each step bringing the final judgment closer to its destination. They reached the galley curtain, and without pausing, Maria pulled it aside and stepped through the 2 men following her in blocking the entrance. The curtain fell back into place, muffling the scene from view. For 3 agonizing minutes, the cabin held its breath. No shouting could be heard, only the faint, indecipherable murmur of low, firm voices. The silence was more damning than any argument could have been. It spoke of a decision already made, of a process that was now merely a formality. Then the curtain was swept aside again. Leo Vance emerged first, practically propelled by one of the security officers. He was utterly broken, his face ashen and streaked with fresh tears, his eyes locked on the floor, as if the patterned carpet were the most fascinating thing in the world. He couldn't bear to look at the rows of faces watching him, a walking personification of failure. Lorraine followed a second later with Maria and the other officer close behind. But Lorraine was not broken. Not outwardly. Sometime in those final moments, her terror had calcified into a hard, brittle shell of defiance. Her back was ramrod straight, her chin held high, her eyes scanning the passengers with a look of theatrical disdain. It was a pathetic last-ditch attempt to reclaim a shred of the authority she had so spectacularly lost. As she drew level with row 4, she stopped, wrenching her arm from the security officer's light grasp. He moved to take her arm again. "Ma'am, we need to keep moving." Lorraine ignored him. Her entire being was focused on the woman in seat 4D. She leaned over her face, contorted in a venomous sneer. "I hope you're happy," she spat, her voice a low, trembling whisper of pure malice. "This must be a real thrill for you, tearing people down. You come into our world, onto our plane, and you ruin our lives over a plate of food. Over nothing." Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She looked up and met Lorraine's hateful glare with an expression of almost academic curiosity. Her reply was quiet, precise, and devastating. "You are still laboring under a profound misapprehension, Ms. Bishop," Naomi began, her voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's hand. "So let me be unequivocally clear for your own sake. My life was not affected by your actions today. I will leave this plane and continue to run my company. It is your life that has been irrevocably altered, and that alteration has nothing to do with me, and even less to do with a vegetable tart." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Your life was ruined the moment you decided that your prejudice was a more valuable asset than your professionalism. It was ruined when you looked at a passenger, a customer who pays your salary, and saw not a person to be served, but a target for your own personal resentments. You believe I set a trap for you, but the truth is you've been building this trap for yourself your entire career, with every subtle slight, every condescending tone, every act of deliberate exclusion you thought no one would notice or challenge. All I did was walk into it. I was not the cause of your downfall, Ms. Bishop. I was simply the audit." The shell of defiance on Lorraine's face visibly cracked. Naomi's words were not an attack. They were a diagnosis, a cold, clinical summary of her own moral and professional bankruptcy. For one horrifying, lucid instant, the blame she had projected onto Naomi recoiled, and she saw her own choices laid bare. It was a fleeting, terrifying glimpse of the truth. "Now, if you'll excuse me," Naomi concluded, turning her gaze back to her laptop, as if dismissing a mildly interesting but ultimately irrelevant distraction. "I have a company to run." That final simple statement of fact broke what was left of Lorraine's composure. The security officer took her arm again, and this time she went without resistance, stumbling slightly, as she was led away, a queen without a kingdom, a performer without a stage. Once they were gone, an audible sigh of relief went through the cabin. As passengers finally began to stand and gather their belongings, a stream of them stopped at Naomi's pod. "That was incredible," said Mark Peterson, the architect. "Thank you. Seriously. Thank you for not letting that stand. You're a class act," an older gentleman in a tweed jacket added. "They picked the wrong woman to mess with today." Naomi accepted their comments with quiet, gracious nods. On the jet bridge, Maria Kendrick was waiting for them, her face etched with a mixture of professional mortification and deep respect. "Dr. Reed, Mr. Chen, Ms. Rossi." Maria began, her voice tight with sincerity. "There are no words to adequately express how sorry I am on behalf of this airline for the disgrace you were forced to witness and endure. It is the single worst failure of service I have seen in my 25 years in this industry." "Thank you, Maria," Naomi said, her tone shifting back to that of a chairwoman. "Apologies are noted, but what I require now is action. This cannot be treated as an isolated incident involving two rogue employees." "It won't be," Maria assured her, her gaze firm. "Their termination is effective immediately as per your directive. Our legal report has been filed. Their records will permanently state termination for gross misconduct, including discriminatory practices, which, as you know, nullifies any severance or benefits and will serve as a permanent red flag in the industry. We are also formally petitioning the Civil Aviation Authority, arguing their behavior constituted a dereliction of their duty of care, creating a hostile environment that compromised the well-being of a passenger. We will do everything in our power to see their licenses reviewed." Isabella Rossi stepped forward. "And the internal review, already in motion," Maria confirmed. "I am personally overseeing a complete audit of all harassment and discrimination complaints from the last 5 years. We will be rebuilding our diversity, equity, and inclusion training from the ground up with your oversight. Read, if you'll have it. This incident will become day 1 of our new mandatory training module. It will be the example of what will never under any circumstances be tolerated at Ascend Air again." Naomi nodded, a flicker of stern approval in her eyes. "Good. That's a start." She looked past Maria towards the bustling terminal of Heathrow, a world away from the gilded cage where this battle had been fought and won. The hard part was over. The important work was just beginning. In the weeks and months that followed, the story of Flight 815 did not stay within the confines of Ascend Air. Mark Peterson, the architect who had been flying for pleasure and had witnessed the whole affair, wrote a lengthy, detailed post about it on a popular travel forum. He didn't know Naomi's full name or title, but he described the incredibly poised black woman, the disgraceful behavior of the crew, and the unbelievable mid-flight board meeting. The story went viral. Journalists picked it up, and through airline sources the names Lorraine Bishop and Leo Vance were leaked. Their faces captured on other passengers' phones during the confrontation were splashed across tabloids and news sites. They became the faces of discriminatory service digital pariahs in an industry built on reputation. For Lorraine Bishop, the fallout was catastrophic. She had been a queen in her small world, respected and feared by junior crew, basking in the perceived glamour of international travel. Now she was unemployable. Every application she sent to other major airlines was met with a polite but firm rejection. Her name was toxic. The story of her public firing at 30,000 feet had become an industry legend, a cautionary tale told in crew lounges around the world. She lost her apartment in a trendy part of New York, unable to afford the rent, without her substantial salary. Her friends from the airline distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with her disgrace. She ended up moving back to her small hometown in the Midwest, a place she had gleefully escaped decades earlier. The last anyone heard, she was working as a cashier at a discount supermarket, her face perpetually soured with a bitterness that had become her defining feature. Sometimes, while scanning groceries, she would see a magazine with Dr. Naomi Reed on the cover, lauded as a titan of industry who had transformed the culture at Ascend Air. The sight was a constant burning reminder of her own self-inflicted ruin. Leo Vance's fate was less dramatic, but equally bleak. His youth and his tearful immediate confession earned him a sliver of pity, but no forgiveness from the industry. He tried to rebrand himself, moving to a different city and applying for jobs in hospitality. But the internet has a long memory. A simple background check was all it took for potential employers to find the news articles detailing his complicity in the ugly affair on Flight 815. He bounced from one low-wage service job to another, his career ambitions permanently crippled by a single flight where he chose to follow the worst of his leaders. Meanwhile, Dr. Naomi Reed used the incident as the powerful, undeniable catalyst for the exact change she had promised. She spearheaded a root and branch overhaul of Ascend Air's recruitment training and service protocols. She implemented a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind with clear, swift consequences. She championed Chloe Sharma, promoting her to a training and development role where her innate sense of decency and professionalism could be taught to new hires. Ascend Air's reputation after a brief but damaging hit rebounded stronger than ever. It became known not just for its luxury, but for its genuine, demonstrable commitment to inclusivity and respect. Bookings soared. The story of Flight 815, once a PR nightmare, became a testament to the new management's integrity. Dr. Reed had taken the ugliest of situations and had not just corrected it, but had used it to build something better and stronger. It was the ultimate karma from an act of ugly prejudice. A beacon of true class was born. And the perpetrators were left to languish in the quiet, desolate ruin of their own making, forever grounded by the weight of their choices. The story of Dr. Naomi Reed and Flight 815 is a powerful reminder that true authority isn't about a uniform or a job title. It's about dignity, integrity, and the courage to stand up against injustice. Lorraine and Leo thought they held all the power, but their power was built on a fragile foundation of prejudice. They learned the hard way that the world is changing, and that karma sometimes doesn't wait for the next life to settle its accounts. This wasn't just a victory for one woman. It was a victory for everyone who has ever been made to feel small, overlooked, or unworthy. What did you think of the crew's immediate karma? Was it deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If stories of justice and powerful comebacks are what you love to see, make sure you hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more true life drama.